Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. Welcome back to another episode of Who Will Be the Biggest Flop? This is part 18 for the weekend ending on December 17th, 2023, and a new movie opened this weekend. And please remember to like this video, please press the red subscribe button to support this channel, and please press the bell to receive notifications. We'll begin by listing the top 5 movies at this weekend's domestic box office. Coming in at number 1 was Warner Brothers' newest movie, Wonka, starring Timothée Chalamet, with earnings of $39 million, though it had actually opened last weekend in a number of international markets. Last weekend, the movie earned $43.2 million internationally, and it added another $69.2 million this weekend to bring its international total up to $112.4 million. Thus, the movie's current global gross box office earnings sit at $151.4 million, which isn't bad, but we'll be looking at this movie's projections shortly to see whether it might break even. Coming in at number 2 was Lionsgate's movie The Hunger Games: The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes that stars the obnoxiously woke actress Rachel Zegler, which earned another $5.8 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $145.3 million, and its international box office rose by another $18.3 million to bring its current international box office total up to $145.1 million. Thus, its current global gross box office now sits at $290.4 million, and the movie had broken even as of last weekend. Coming in at number 3 from Japan was Hayao Miyazaki's newest animated movie for Studio Ghibli, The Boy and the Heron, which earned another $5.2 million domestically to bring its current domestic box office total up to $23.1 million, which, when combined with its current international box office total of $76 million, means that its current global gross box office now sits at $99.2 million. And as I had explained last week in my video that was part 17 of my Who Will Be the Biggest Flop video series, I guesstimated that The Boy and the Heron would likely break even at around $100 million. So for all intents and purposes, I think it's safe to assume that the movie has probably achieved that as of this weekend thanks to its additional domestic and international box office earnings. Also from Japan was the movie that came in 4th place in this weekend's domestic box office, Toho Studios' movie Godzilla Minus One, which earned another $4.9 million domestically to bring its current domestic box office total up to $34.3 million. And when combined with its current international box office of $29.8 million, means that its current global gross box office total now sits at $64.1 million, which is incredibly good given that the movie's production budget was only $15 million, and its estimated break-even point was probably less than $37.5 million. And that brings us to the movie that was in 5th place in this weekend's domestic box office, the animated movie Trolls Band Together, which earned another $4 million domestically to bring its current domestic box office total up to $88.7 million. And when combined with its international box office total of $94.6 million, means that the movie's current global gross box office total now sits at $183.2 million. And as I had said last week, this movie is more than likely not going to break even because its production budget is $95 million, which when multiplied by 2.5 yields an estimated break-even point of $237.5 million. So given how far along this movie already is in its theatrical run at 5 weeks, its final global gross box office revenue will fall short of that, but not by a lot. So it's not being considered as a contestant for Who Will Be the Biggest Flop? Now let's talk about Wonka again. Determining whether this movie will be able to break even or not is complicated by the fact that it opened internationally last week and probably opened in several more international markets this weekend. And this could explain why it had an overall weekly gain in international box office this weekend instead of a weekly loss. Naturally, as the movie continues to play, both its domestic and international box office will experience weekly drops, probably beginning next weekend, which will be the movie's 2nd weekend at the box office domestically. Now, given that there are previous movies featuring the character of Willy Wonka from 1971 and 2005, which were named Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, respectively, I did look at the box office for both of these movies. Unfortunately, since the 1971 movie is 52 years old, its available box office data is incomplete, so I can't really use that one as a basis for understanding how well the current Wonka movie may perform, even though its characters appear to be based more on that movie version of Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory children's book than the 2005 movie. There is complete box office data available for the newer 2005 version, which is only 18 years old, and it's based on the same source material as the 1971 movie. But the current Wonka movie is only loosely based on the original source material because, unlike the previous two movies, it's a prequel, and Roald Dahl never wrote a prequel to his famous Charlie and the Chocolate Factory children's book. Further, due to colonialist and racist controversies that resulted from Roald Dahl's original 1964 book, the Oompa Loompas were changed significantly for the original 1971 movie, though the 2005 movie more closely followed the 1973 revision of Dahl's book, in which he had changed his previously very controversial origins of the Oompa Loompas. The new Wonka prequel further changes the Oompa Loompa origins, though it includes aspects from both the 1971 and 2005 versions, as well as taking more descriptions from Dahl's 1973 revised book. How moviegoers will react to that is difficult to say, but as I have talked about in previous videos, prequels tend to not do as well as their original movies, which is demonstrated by the following. The 1979 Butch and Sundance The Early Days prequel was nowhere near as good as the original 1969 Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. George Lucas's Star Wars prequel trilogy movies that he began in 1999 and ended in 2005 were not as popular or well received as his original trilogy. Peter Jackson's The Hobbit movie trilogy that began in 2012 and ended in 2014 did not do as well or was as well regarded as his Lord of the Rings movies that he directed from 2001 to 2003. J.K. Rowling's Fantastic Beasts movies that ran from 2016 to 2022 and were both prequels and spin-offs were nowhere near as well received as her very popular Harry Potter books and movies that take place some 70 years later. And the current Hunger Games: The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes movie that is both a prequel and a spin-off isn't doing anywhere near as well as the original 4 Hunger Games movies. Thus, being a prequel is probably going to work against Wonka, but whether the movie ultimately breaks even or not is very difficult to say right now. When 2005's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was released, it did rather well, earning $56.2 million domestically during its opening weekend, leading to a final domestic box office of $206.5 million and a final global gross box office total of $475.8 million. Its production budget was $150 million, so its mid-range estimated break-even point would have been around 2.5 times that, or $375 million, to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget. So the 2005 movie definitely broke even and made a profit, but as the box office for Wonka shows, its opening weekend is a lot lower at only $39 million. And if I project that forward using an estimated range of average weekly drops of 30 to 40%, then its possible final domestic box office total may range somewhere between $97.5 million at the low end, $111.4 million at the mid-range, and $129.8 million at the upper end. So even without taking inflation into account, Wonka is only going to earn a fraction of what the 2005 Charlie and the Chocolate Factory movie earned domestically by a range of around 47 to 63%. But Wonka has a production budget of $125 million, which is lower than the 2005 movie's production budget by $25 million. So its estimated break-even point is 2.5 times that, or around $312.5 million. Thus, the movie doesn't have to earn as much as 2005's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in order to break even, and that will all depend on how well it does internationally. As of its opening weekend in the US, Wonka has a domestic share of 25.76%, and if that were to be maintained throughout its theatrical run, then the movie would break even because its final global gross box office total would range between $378.5 million at the low end, $432.4 million at the mid-range, and $503.8 million at the upper end. But the movie's current domestic share of 25.76% is very low because the movie opened internationally before it opened domestically, which strongly suggests that as the movie plays in theaters, that domestic share is probably going to start going up as the international box office, as with the domestic box office, begins to experience weekly drops. The question then becomes, how much will the domestic share change over the course of the movie's theatrical run? The 2005 movie ended up with a domestic share of 43.39%. So if the domestic share for Wonka goes up to a domestic share that's closer to, say, 45%, that would have a dramatic effect on the final global gross box office numbers to the point where they will drop to a range of $216.6 million at the low end, $247.5 million at the mid-range, and $288.4 million at the upper end. And that entire range is below the movie's estimated break-even point of $312.5 million. The best way to illustrate the effect of domestic share on the final global gross box office numbers is via this chart. And we can immediately see that between domestic shares of 25.76% to 45%, the green line, which represents the estimated break-even point of $312.5 million, cuts right through the center of the grouped curves and shows that if the domestic share rises above around 36%, then the likelihood of the movie breaking even falls below 50%. So as of now, I cannot say whether the movie will break even or not because it depends heavily on how well the movie performs internationally. And given how close we currently are to the new year of 2024, we may not know until after the new year whether Wonka will break even or not. But even if the movie fails to break even, its losses for Warner Brothers would likely be less than $50 million. So Wonka won't qualify to be a contestant for who will be the biggest flop. Now we'll move on to our current contestants, and we'll begin with the one that came in 6th place in this weekend's overall domestic box office. So let's have a warm welcome for the contestant from Disney, the animated movie Wish. Domestically, the movie earned another $3.2 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $54.3 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $15.8 million to bring its current international box office total up to $71.9 million. Globally, the movie earned another $20.7 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $126.2 million. So using a possible range of average weekly drops ranging from 30 to 40%, we get the following range of possible final domestic box office values ranging from a low of $61.6 million at the low end, $63.3 million at the mid-range, and $65.5 million at the upper end. And using the movie's current domestic share of 43.02%, which is lower than last week's, the movie's possible final global gross box office revenue may range from $143.1 million on the low end, $147.1 million at the mid-range, and $152.4 million at the upper end, which is also higher than last week's projection, but still far below the movie's estimated break-even point of $500 million, which is obtained by multiplying the movie's $200 million production budget by 2.5. So this movie may lose somewhere on the order of $347.6 million to $356.9 million in global gross box office revenue, which when we divide by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, leaves a range of possible losses for Disney ranging from $173.8 million to $178.4 million. And we'll see shortly where that places the movie in terms of ranking for who will be the biggest flop. Now let's have a warm welcome for our next entry from Columbia Pictures and Apple Film, Napoleon starring Joaquin Phoenix, which was 8th in this weekend's domestic box office. Domestically, the movie earned another $2.2 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $57 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $13.7 million to bring its international box office total up to $131.4 million. So globally, the movie earned another $17.6 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $188.4 million. Using a range of possible average weekly drops of 30 to 40%, I can project that the movie's final domestic box office revenue may range from $63 million at the low end, $64.5 million at the mid-range, and $66.3 million at the upper end. And with a current domestic share of 30.26%, we get a range of possible final global gross box office values ranging from $208.3 million at the low end, $213 million at the mid-range, and $219.2 million at the upper end, which is still nowhere near the estimated break-even point of $500 million, which is obtained by multiplying the movie's $200 million production budget by 2.5. So Napoleon may lose somewhere on the order of $280.8 million to $291.7 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when we divide by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that we get a potential range of losses for Columbia Pictures and Apple Film of $140.4 million to $145.8 million, which is still incredibly close to the range of losses estimated for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, but not in a statistical tie. And now, please give a warm welcome to our final entry, which came from Disney and Marvel Studios that slipped way down into 15th place overall in this weekend's domestic box office. The very woke 33rd MCU movie entitled The Marvels, starring Brie Larson and Samuel L. Jackson. For its 6th weekend at the box office, domestically it earned another $514,000 to bring its current domestic box office total up to $84 million. Now, as I had reported in a video that I had released 2 weeks ago, Disney was not planning to report the movie's updated international and global box office numbers anymore, but there was an update this weekend. So the international box office increased by $2.8 million to bring the movie's current international box office total up to $119.3 million. Globally, the movie earned another $3.9 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $203.3 million. That places the current domestic share for The Marvels at 41.33%. For projections, since the movie's average weekly drop has stabilized, I will be using its value of 54.89% and one standard deviation above and below for a range from 49.14% to 60.63%. Thus, using that range of average weekly drops, I can project that the movie's final domestic box office may fall somewhere within the range from $84.7 million at the low end, $84.9 million at the mid-range, to $85.1 million at the upper end of the range. And as I have said for the past 2 weeks, The Marvels is going to be the first ever MCU movie to not earn at least $100 million at the domestic box office, which effectively means that it's going to become the MCU's lowest grossing film domestically of all time. Not only that, using the movie's current domestic share of 41.33%, I can project that the movie's final global gross box office will only be somewhere within the range from $204.9 million at the low end, $205.4 million at the mid-range, and only $205.9 million at the upper end. So the movie will most definitely become the MCU's lowest grossing movie worldwide of all time as well. Given that the movie has a production budget of $274.8 million, we can calculate an estimated break-even point range by multiplying that by 2.5 and 3.0, which yields values ranging from $687 million to $824.4 million. And when we subtract the movie's range of possible final global gross box office values from the estimated break-even point range, we get a range of possible losses from $481.1 million to $619.5 million in global gross box office revenue. When we divide that range by 2, we get a possible range of losses for Disney and Marvel Studios ranging from $240.6 million to $309.7 million, which brings the movie incredibly close to the range of losses that The Flash has. So we'll now combine the results from our newest contestants with our other 4 contestant movies that are no longer playing in theaters. The Flash, Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction, Haunted Mansion, and Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. The production budgets for each of these 4 movies, as shown in this chart, range from a low of $157.8 million to a high of $300 million. And after estimating a break-even point range for each movie by multiplying each movie's production budget by 2.5 and 3.0, we can visualize the estimated break-even point ranges along with the final global gross box office revenue earned by each movie in this next chart, which clearly shows just how much lower each of the movie's earnings were as compared to their respective break-even point ranges. And when we subtract each of the movie's final global gross box office revenues from their respective break-even point ranges, we'll get a range of losses in terms of global gross box office revenue that will then divide by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves. The resulting quotients are the estimated range of losses suffered by each studio that's responsible for producing each of these 4 movies that all flopped in theaters, which I have combined with the losses for the current contestants playing in theaters. The Flash, whose losses range from $239.7 million to $314.7 million, remains in first place, with The Marvels remaining in second place. Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction, whose losses range from $176.4 million to $250.1 million, remains in third place, while Wish follows it in fourth place. Haunted Mansion, whose losses range from $138.6 million to $178 million, remains in fifth place. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, whose losses range from $78.8 million to $151.3 million, remains in sixth place, while Napoleon takes seventh place. So be sure to tune in next week for another exciting episode of Who Will Be the Biggest Flop? Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.